lit up now. It gets bright when we get ready to, we're streaming also. But we would like to welcome everyone tonight from all across our communities. We believe this is very, very important. We're all here for the same reason, because we love our country. The people of faith have been described as the silent majority, but we have seen the effects of those who represent a small minority with the loudest voice. But we can no longer sit on the sidelines. We must engage. We've been the silent majority long enough. We must become the vocal majority. If we really are the majority, then it's time to get off the sidelines. Edmund Burke said this: all that is required for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Let's rephrase that. All that is required for evil to triumph is for good people, meaning everyone, to do nothing. We cannot allow our country to keep going down this road. We cannot allow our religious liberties and freedoms to be taken away from us. We want, every one of us here want a great future for our children and our grandchildren. So we need to invest in that. My former pastor used to tell the story about in the Revolutionary War about the men at the home getting ready to go to battle. Said as they went out the door, said, Grandma grabbed the broom, and they said, where you going, Grandma? She said, I know I can't fight, but I'm going to show them whose side I'm on. Sometimes we just need to show the world whose side we're on, do we not? And I believe that it's just not a political side, but it's a righteous side. And again, I want to thank every one of you for coming here tonight, and to those that are watching online. And we are honored to welcome the mayor of Gate City, Bob Richards, to come and address the congregation.
Well, it's certainly my pleasure to be here tonight, and I tell you, I'm excited about the program tonight. It has been a pleasure working with George Minning and the Turning Point Faith people, and to bring this program to Gate City. And so we appreciate them. And I tell you, I think it's great for Gates. I'm going to put on my mayor's hat for a moment. I think it's great that we can work with groups and organizations like Turning Point Faith to bring programs like this to Gate City, and to use facilities that we already have, and to promote things to let people know that Gate City is on the map and we can do things like this. And when we had our planning meeting earlier this afternoon, if I'm not mistaken, George, correct, this is being live streamed all around the world, right? Through your all its affiliates and stuff. So Gate City's gonna be around the world today. So it's great. But I do want to thank Turning Point Faith for helping us put on this program tonight. And of course, our speakers for being here tonight. But I especially want to thank Pastor Grizzle and their congregation for being such gracious host. When we were looking for a facility to host this meeting tonight, we approached them, and they were just more than willing with open arms to help us with this program tonight. And he and his staff, whenever we've asked anything of them, they have just stepped up to the plate and really have gone beyond more than what we've asked to help them to do with this program tonight. So we're very thankful for them. But more importantly, we're thankful for you being here tonight. And what I really hope that will happen is that I know you're going to be blessed by the message tonight, by these two speakers, but I hope you will go away challenged to make a difference in your communities. And so I'm going to introduce George Minning from Turning Point Faith, and he's going to talk a little bit about the program tonight and a little bit about Turning Point Faith. So George.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. It really is an honor to be here. I've only been in Gate City for a couple hours, but really felt welcome, and I'm loving it down here, to say the least. So I'm the MC for the night. That means that if I'm doing my job correctly, I'll be the least important, most forgettable person here. That's exactly how I want it. I take that job very seriously, so I'm going to keep these remarks pretty brief, and we can get straight away to the good part. So like it was mentioned, we're working in conjunction with Turning Point Faith. I'm the representative for the state of Virginia. Just so I know, who has heard of Turning Point or Charlie Kirk? Okay, we got a couple. All right, cool. So if you don't know, Turning Point USA, we're a conservative nonprofit. Our mission is to gather, educate, and organize people for the defense of freedom. And we started Turning Point Faith in September. And I think the best way I can describe this with a little bit of a personal story, if you don't mind. So I grew up in what I would call a politically plugged-in family, but we were not particularly religious. I went to college and heard the gospel, and God saved me there. And for a long time, I kept my politics over here, and I kept my spiritual life over here, and I thought there was not much interaction between them. And I think that's a common thought with a lot of Christians nowadays. But over time, I began to realize that we're called to something different as Christians. We're not called to keep the church within four walls. You know, Jesus said to go out into the nations. The Christian life isn't about waiting 80 years, getting our ticket to heaven punched, and then getting beamed up to heaven when we die. We are going to leave the earth better than we found it. We're to be salt and light and pursue justice. And over time, I realized God is not silent on what the government's role is. He's not silent about what kings and those in authority are supposed to do, what their roles are, and how we should treat each other in a civil society. Think of all the justice passages. Every time it says, stand for justice, correct the oppressor. That's what I'm thinking about. So that was all going on in my head, and then 2020 happens, that calamitous year, and the church is mostly silent at a time where probably a prophetic voice, the voice of God, needed to be heard most. It was silent. And there was a failure in the church, I think we can say. And not only was the church silent, but actually the state came in and started bossing them around, telling them this is how we should worship. You can't sing. Fauci even recommended that communion not be served. So we're in a time right now where religious freedom is under attack, and the church is silent. Just now, on Sunday, will be the first Sunday where Bill C-4 in Canada, our friends up north, was passed. This bill passed unanimously through the parliament, pushed by the Conservative Party, actually, more than anybody else. And it is probably the greatest assault on religious liberty that we've seen in quite a long time in modern history in the Western world. So the faith community needs to make its voice heard, defend their God-given liberties, renew our commitment to being salt and light in the world. That's what Turning Point Faith is all about. That's why I'm here, all the way up from Fairfax. That's why I'm coming here and why this is so important. It's gatherings and conversations like these that I want to see more of. And I think this is what the Christian community needs and what we can do. And we want this conversation to continue long after tonight. This isn't a one-off thing. One of the things we want to be able to do is do things like starting hubs and chapters in the area where we can gather people together. We can discuss these things. We were talking earlier, and one idea we had was Thomas's book here, going through it, talking about it. What does God say about these issues? We can gather people, we can have these conversations, and I think events like these prove that this is possible and fruitful. So we want to activate the faith community in the public square. That's what we're all about, activating the faith community in the public square. And following tonight's theme, we want to reclaim a vision for America that recognizes our calling to be a city on a hill. So I'd love to talk with you more about Turning Point Faith if you're interested, if that sounds kind of where your head's at, or if that sounds interesting, you want to learn more, please come talk to me. I'll just be lingering around, and I'd love to get to know you and get you plugged in. And so I want to leave you with a verse from the Psalms that I think encapsulates our goal pretty well. This has become one of my favorite verses. It's from the 119th Psalm, 46th verse. I will speak of thy testimonies also before kings and will not be ashamed. So, before I introduce our speaker, I want to do a couple of little housekeeping things. We're doing a Q&A after this. If you want to send in a question, you want to send an email to questions.tpfaith@gmail.com. It's just an email. You won't get bombarded if you don't want to. Questions.tpfaith.com. And then afterwards, if you don't want to send it in or you didn't have time, we'll have mics going around in the end. So think about some questions if you want to ask, if you've got a burning question. But I will be taking the ones in the email first. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker. He made it really easy on me because we have his book right here, and these are being sold outside in the lobby. And there's a bio on this, so I'm able to just steal it directly. And I think that's probably the best way to introduce him here. So our first speaker here is Thomas Cromwell. He was born on a Christian communal farm in Shropshire, England, and moved to America at age 14. He spent 25 years in the Middle East as a journalist, publisher, and peace builder, studying the monotheistic faiths in their homeland and working to promote understanding among those diverse communities in the region. He traveled throughout the communist world before the fall of the Soviet Union, learning firsthand about life under Marxist regimes. His work and curiosity about human civilization has taken him to some 130 countries. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome to Thomas Cromwell.
Good evening. Thanks very much for coming. I thought before this meeting of a phrase from a sentence from Jesus that I know you're all familiar with. For where two or three are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them. I think we're more than two people, so I think it bodes well for this meeting. I know myself, and I think all people of faith, there's never an end to your journey. There's never a conclusion to your search for God's will for yourself, for your country, for your family, for the world. Because the world is always changing, so we have to learn to adapt and understand how to deal with the world as best as possible. I think, as the introductions have indicated, we're facing in America some really unprecedented challenges. It's not just a change from one political party to the other. There's a basic erosion of the values on which this country was founded. Our families, our faith, our institutions are really under attack. And I hope tonight that what I share with you will be of some use for you in understanding what's behind that, the framework for that problem. Our title is Reclaiming the Providence for America. The reason this is an important idea is because providence is the most important way, I think, of understanding God's purpose. Providence originates in the creation. We were created for a purpose. And the whole history is a history, if you look at it deeply enough, of God working to achieve that purpose. That purpose is the providence. So providence guides history, guides nations, guides our lives. The other interesting thing about providence is that it precedes religion and therefore transcends religion. Religion didn't exist when we were created. Religion was developed later as people tried to find God, tried to understand providence. So providence is a beautiful way of understanding the purpose of God above all religious differences, above all denominational differences. And that's why I think we can come together irrespective of where we come from. It doesn't really matter. But what is important is that we all try to understand what God's providence is for this day, for this time. We know that God is good. The only meaningful concept of God is a God that's a good God. Therefore, we also know that the purpose of our existence is ultimately for good. But we live in a world with many evils. So we try to reconcile those two things in our lives. We also all want good, right? We all want happiness, we want fulfillment. But we also all face all sorts of difficulties and struggles. Nobody's free from that. It doesn't matter how much money you have, how beautiful your life is, how wonderful you are. We all face them. So in history, we see the history of God raising up individuals and groups and nations to help fulfill his original purpose. America is such a nation. You all know how the history of Christianity moves sort of from the Middle East into Europe through the struggles of the Protestant Reformation. The Pilgrims left to try and establish a better society under God in America. This was an amazing event in history. It was very courageous. After them, there were all sorts of religious revivals, notably the work of John Wesley, George Whitefield, Jonathan Edwards, the Great Awakening, which preceded the establishment of America. Our founders were influenced by these ideals. What other nation was ever established on the proposition that we're under God, that our rights come from God? It was a unique event in history. That's why in the Declaration, the last sentence says, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." So for the founders, they transcended their differences. They overcame the limitations of their life, the troubles they were facing individually, in order to establish a nation under God. So the problem today can be seen as a loss of those values, a loss of a sense of providence and a sense of the direction we should be going in. As I mentioned, our education is being corrupted. People are not learning that in school. Our media is not honest. Even elements of society like sports are being taken over by what we can only consider a hostile and destructive agenda. In 1798, John Adams said, "Our Constitution was made only for a religious and moral people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other." He's right. This system doesn't work if the people are not good, if we are not faithful. Believe me, as my introduction indicated, I've been to many countries, 130 countries. Most of them have beautiful constitutions. But why is it that they didn't flower as America flowered? Why didn't South America develop as North America developed? The reason was because of the people and the ideas and the inspiration behind the founding of the nation. President Reagan said something also I think is very relevant to our meeting. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States, where men were free. So we haven't kept our commitment to the divine providence, to the divine principles and the divine values that it was built on. So we're losing our liberty. How can we redeem, how can we reclaim the providence? I think it's helpful and important to have a historical context for this topic. There are really two different types of change in history. The American Revolution, with the Bill of Rights, was born out of the English Glorious Revolution and Bill of Rights of 1689. Both of them had certain kind of elements, fundamental elements that produced certain type of results. They were theistic, they believed in God. That was the basis for absolute moral and ethical values. They believed that God or the divine was supreme. Therefore, religion was essential. If God is supreme, we have to have a way of communicating and following God. They believed that rights came from God, not from government. This secured personal liberties. They believed the individual was more important than the government. This is the basis for democracy. They believed that private property was sacrosanct. That's the basis for the free markets. And they believe that peaceful change is possible, and that's the basis for peaceful evolution of society. By contrast, we've had a history, especially in the last century, of very different types of revolutionary change. Atheistic, basically born out of the French Revolution of 1789, which was a very violent and bloody revolution. It was fundamentally atheistic, and therefore there were no transcendent or lasting moral or ethical values. They denied the supremacy of the supreme being, so the government took the place of God. They believed that rights came from the state. Therefore, personal liberties and rights were never guaranteed. If they come from the state, they can be taken by the state. That's exactly what we're experiencing now. They also believed in the supremacy of the government over the individual. This was the root of dictatorship, totalitarianism, which manifests in the 20th century as socialism, communism, and fascism. They believed private property was not sacrosanct. They believed in state ownership, which led to a kind of crony capitalism where the state favors one person over another. Again, we're seeing that now. And the fruit of their activities, their violent change, is terrorism, oppressive regimes when they do take power. So these are two very, very different types of change. What's the origin of those two types of change? That's really what I want to address tonight. Excuse me. They derive from two different types of human character, human belief, and human behavior, which could be traced back to the biblical figures of Cain and Abel. Some of you may know Jordan Peterson. He's a righteous academic in Canada who's really fighting for freedom, I would say. He said, Cain and Abel are prototypical human beings. Humanity enters history at the end of the story of Adam and Eve, and then the archetypal patterns of human behavior are instantaneously presented. The first two human beings engage in a fratricidal struggle that ends in the death of the best one of them. That's the story of human beings in history. And that's why I think it's very easy to be depressed about the world, about the future, because we've all grown up in a world in which Cain is dominant. So what are the differences between Cain and Abel as prototypical or archetypal characters? Cain is believing and faithful. He's humble, contrite. He's also self-critical and responsible. And this is probably the most important characteristic. He takes responsibility for his error. He's also forgiving because he does that, and patient. Finally, and very importantly, he's willing to sacrifice to defeat evil and to save Cain. Cain, by contrast, is unbelieving and unfaithful. He's jealous and resentful. He's filled with envy. He's blameful of others, and he will not take responsibility for his own error. He's unforgiving and impatient. He's vengeful and violent in dominating other people. And finally, if it comes to it, he's willing to murder Abel to get his way. So these are two diametrically opposed character types. So we could say the English and American revolutions were Abel type, and the French Revolution was Cain type. Marxism came along. Marx came about 50 years, the Communist Manifesto came about 50 years after the French Revolution. And we can think, I think, of Marxism as the perfection of Cain-type ideology. Marx was a very Cain-like figure if you study his history. He was bitter, he was resentful, he was unrepentant, he was vengeful. He had two main theories, dialectical materialism and historical materialism, which is the dialectic applied to history. If you look into those theories, you'll see that he believed that nature itself embodied a principle of conflict, that evolution took place through conflict. In other words, through destruction of what existed in order to create something better. Applying that to history, he believed that one group had to defeat the other group, destroy the other group, in order for progress to take place, for a synthesis to emerge from that dialectic. If we compare the last words, or almost final words, of the Communist Manifesto to the Declaration, you can see the difference. It says, in short, the communists everywhere support every revolutionary movement against the existing social and political order of things. The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. There it is, openly stating we're here to destroy you. And that's what they've done. After Marx, there have been other significant waves of sort of post-Marxist or neo-Marxist ideas that have affected our society terribly. The Frankfurt School, for example, tried to marry Freudianism with Marxism, and they came up with what they call critical theory. And basically, they're people like Herbert Marcuse or Wilhelm Reich. They were the ones responsible for the sexual revolution. Postmodernism, people like Michel Foucault, who's really like the hero of social studies departments in almost every university in this country and much of the world, developed critical theories to another level. Everything for them was a target of what they call deconstruction. Every society as it exists has to be broken down in order for a better one to emerge. That's why you see them turning on one thing after another to extremes. Imagine that they're actually attacking the basic biological fact that there's only men and women, there's only two sexes. You would think that's insane, but that's what they're doing. So there's several things in common, certain streams that tie together Marxism and neo-Marxism. They're atheistic and therefore anti-religion. They're anti-individual. They don't believe in the importance of the individual. They're anti-traditional families. They're anti-free markets and anti-capitalism. They blame others and they refuse to take responsibility. And ultimately, they're violent and they oppress others. Doesn't it sound familiar? This is exactly kind of the agenda of the radicals, burning places down, burning cities down, attacking innocent people. So what has the outcome of Marxism been? Marx promises a utopia. Engels said the difference between Marxism and Christianity was that Marxism offered a utopia on this earth. In other words, a perfect system you could achieve in your life, compared to Christianity, which offers an ideal, a kingdom of heaven in an afterlife. That's really been the selling point of Marxism. But what is the fruit of Marxism? Nobody really knows. The cost of Marxism has been so enormous. In the last century, according to the Black Book of Communism, something like 94 million people lost their lives at the hands of communism. But that may be a modest estimate. The Epoch Times estimates that 80 million people were killed in China alone by the Chinese Communist Party. So when people are trying to normalize relations with China, which is still ruled to this day by the Chinese Communist Party, they're trying to normalize relations with a blood-drenched monster. To reclaim the providence for America and to enable America to fulfill its providential role in the world. And I really want to stress that. America is not only to be good for itself, it's to be good for the world. You can see if America doesn't stand up, who is there? When we ran from Afghanistan in chaos, who was there to take our place? Who is there to confront China or Russia? So America is blessed, not just for America, but for the world. So we have to expose and we have to reject Cain-type ideologies. And we have to embrace the way of Abel, the character of Abel, the way of personal responsibility. I have here exactly the same quote the pastor used about it. All it takes for triumph to succeed is for good men to do nothing. But I'd like to complete that idea. The only thing necessary for the triumph of good is for men and women to fulfill their God-given responsibilities. We know from the Bible that God created us with responsibility. Adam and Eve in the garden were given a rule. If you break the rule, you fall, you die. That rule has been consistent throughout history. That never changes, because it's the fundamental relationship between God, our Father and Creator, and we, His children. That is the rule. It's not enough for us just to go back to where we were. Where we were is where Marxism came in, where Marxism gained traction. We need to understand the threat more comprehensively, and we need to resist and oppose it absolutely. We cannot compromise with evil. We can love Abel, but we cannot compromise. We can love Cain, but we cannot compromise with Cain's evil. In a way, I'd like to think about this, just to conclude, is that we need to become the parents, the loving, the good, the responsible parents that Cain and Abel never had. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. That was wonderful. So, just before we get to our next speaker here, just want to remind everybody, we're still taking questions. If you have an interesting thing you want to expand on from there, it's questions.tpfaith@gmail.com, or if you prefer, you can wait till we pass around the mics. So, our next speaker is Victor Jessop. He is the co-founder and president of the New America Initiative, originally from Australia. He has long been an advocate for principled government based on moral values. As such, he has always opposed Marxist and other leftist ideologies that deny the existence of a creator and a divine purpose for our existence. His advocacy work has included a decade at the United Nations headquarters in New York on behalf of private organizations championing democracy, religious freedom, human rights, and free market economies. In 2019, Victor and his family left Australia, they're with us tonight, and settled here in Gate City, now working to combat the influence of the radical left and destructive ideologies. So let's welcome Victor Jessop.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. That's better. I have to make sure that I have your attention. As a matter of fact, I have a very difficult task to fulfill tonight, and that is to follow my good friend. Whenever he speaks, I just want to sit there and listen for the rest of the night, because there is such a wisdom in what he has to say, and I can assure you there is so much more than he has been able to share in 15 minutes or so. I will give a nod. You may have seen on the way in the book, The Triumph of Good. This is a book which Thomas has published literally within the last 2-3 weeks. It's fresh off the press. And in many regards, this program tonight and its title, its quest, really, the quest to reclaim the providence for America, is a product or an outgrowth from this book and the contemplation that has gone into its writing and the vision that it seeks to reveal of where we are in this moment and where we need to be in a future, frankly, very close to this moment. Because if we lose any more time, and if the retreat that has taken place in our nation away from the providential purpose and principles under which we were created, they may be lost forever, or at least for a very long time. So reclaiming the providence for America is no trivial pursuit. And the forces that we are confronting are dark, they are ominous, and they have entrenched themselves and insinuated themselves into virtually every aspect of our American life. So Thomas hinted at this, that if you look at this from the point of view of Cain and Abel, Cain symbolizes and manifests evil. Cain's pretty scary. He's also violent and dangerous, and he has the capacity to kill you. So this is the moment that we now face. So having said all that, now I want to shift gears a little bit, because this book that Thomas has written is actually and fundamentally very, very optimistic. But it's an optimism rooted in a deep awareness of reality. I think many of you, I hope, will understand this parallel, that it's sort of an optimism similar to that which Prime Minister Churchill had in England in the summer of 1940. Now, not everybody here is a history buff, I understand. But in the summer of 1940, Britain was standing virtually alone in the world against the massive military might of Nazi Germany. From 1939 into early 1940, Hitler's tanks and armies had rolled through Europe. They'd rolled through and occupied France. And the British, and I think you can check the numbers, but 200,000+ British soldiers and an additional 100,000 French soldiers had just retreated and evacuated France at Dunkirk. It was almost a miraculous event, actually, where hundreds and hundreds of little boats crossed the English Channel and ferried these escaping and retreating soldiers and were able to bring them back to England. So here we are, a small island nation with the might of Germany's military now aimed at it. The United States was not in the war. It was just Great Britain and a few of the outlying former colonies like Australia and maybe Canada were providing some support. And around, I think it was June or so of 1940, the Nazis launched their campaign to basically terrorize Britain and to bomb Britain into submission. And so night after night after night, waves of Nazi bombers flew towards England and were bombing the cities. London, which is what we associate most with, was being hammered every single night. And the only real defense that Britain had against that onslaught was a little over 3,000 young airmen who night after night took off into a night sky in a tiny little single propeller plane to meet the bombers as they were making their way to drop their lethal loads on London and other cities. And those young men, there are a little over 3,000. It was said of those young men that never has so much been owed by so many to so few. Those young men, the average age of whom was 20. Can you imagine? 20 years old. That's average. How many of them were 18, 19? How long could you have been flying if you were an 18-year-old? And yet they would take off into the night to confront this enemy. And through their valor and their determination, literally 3,000 or so young men, you could say, saved a nation, and they turned the tide of the Second World War. They halted the German advance, and from that moment, the tables turned. So just a few people, and here's one of the points that I would like to emphasize tonight. When we face grave danger, ominous foes, many times it's not a huge army that will prevail and will turn the tide. It's just the right army, the right people in the right moment with the right disposition and the right tools necessary for the task. And those young men saved Britain. And it was from the depth of that despair that Winston Churchill made some of the greatest speeches, at least, of the 20th century. And if you want to go home and be inspired, go online and just check out some of his addresses at that time. And ask yourself, how could a person have so much courage and conviction and confidence that his nation would prevail when the days looked so dark? And the answer has to be that burning and dwelling inside of that man was a faithfulness that God would not betray a faithful people. And so I want my task here tonight in a way is to identify the path forward and the path from this moment in which we find ourselves now. So what are just a few of the principles of that path forward? First of all, as I've said, it's not how many. What's that expression? It's not the size of the dog in the fight. You all heard that before? Right, not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog. When a teenage boy rose to confront Goliath, he was just one boy. But he had at least two components. One was faithfulness to three. Faithfulness to his king, a courageous disposition, and a particular skill. That skill was precisely what was necessary to get past the defenses of Goliath. Every evil force has an Achilles heel. Every evil has a vulnerable point. Who knows where or what that vulnerable point is best of all? Who really knows? Question. Answer. Who do you think really knows? Each of us. Each force. Everything that's happening. Who knows? Does not God know? Do you think God didn't know Goliath's strengths and Goliath's weakness? And God knew where to turn to find his David. When Gideon was looking for and searching for an army, to raise an army, he was looking for the soldiers with the disposition and the courage to win a great battle. So it's interesting. David and Gideon were armies of 1 and 300, right? 300, who went on offense. The young men who saved Great Britain was an army of 3,000, an air force of 3,000, who defended against a massive attack and prevailed. So as we go forward, really think it's not numbers, but it's disposition and character. The other couple of points I'd like to make. One of the challenges that we have, and I'm just going to say it, by and large, faithful Christian people, we are not perfect, but we are good. You are good people. There is a goodness in you that was touched and enabled you and encouraged you to come here tonight. Right? That goodness is real. But we are also humble. And we are aware that we're not perfect. So the enemy knows that. And Satan, as the accuser, has like a laser capacity to point to our limitations and to accuse us. And in accusing us, compromise our courage, diminish our energy, right? Demoralize us a little bit. So here's what I'd like to suggest. Imagine yourself and acknowledge our imperfection, but even though imperfect, be strong and steadfast, unmovable. Shrug off doubt. And I have a picture in my mind, and it goes back, I think, a few years ago. There was an advertisement where there was like a beaker, and it was full of really dirty, stained water. And there was this cleaning agent, and you could just put 1, 2, or 3 drops in it, and all of the stain disappeared. Does anyone else remember that ad, right? Okay, folks, you are the drop. Imagine, picture yourself, put it into your heart. I am a drop of concentrated cleaning agent. I am that representative in my family, in my community, in this region, wherever I am that drop. And my presence as one drop has the capacity to clean many people and impact in a great way the community and the society around me. We need that confidence. And along with that, we don't judge, we heal. We don't divide, we unite. We don't give up, We don't give in, and we don't retreat. We don't give up, we don't give in, and we do not retreat, not 1/2 an inch. We need that confidence. God needs that confidence burning in your mind, burning in our soul. I am that one drop, and I will never concede. This is a battle I'm in to win. So I'm going to end with 2 points. In order to be willing to sacrifice, as Thomas articulates, is the nature of Abel. We need, I believe, to understand why. Why should I make this sacrifice? For what purpose? And I'll apply this to our situation here in the United States. In the previous administration with President Trump, his catch cry was MAGA, Make America Great Again, right? Or America First. But here's my question. Thomas touched on this already. The deeper question for me is, why make America great again? Why should we want America first? Now you can say, well, because that'll be good for us. We're American, we're living here. We want this to be the best country in the world. Yes, 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 it's all true. But I want to suggest to you that there's at least a couple of other dimensions to that answer. One is, why do we need to make America great again? Because without America's greatness, the world is lost. I come from Australia. 25 million people and a half a dozen or so watching this live right now. It's Saturday morning in Australia. 25 million people in the same time zone flying due north. There is 1.4 billion Chinese people with a malign and malignant Communist Party ruling them, and they threaten everybody in that region. Do you think Australia, with 25 million people, is going to be able ultimately to defend itself against China? Now, I'm not saying that America should be like the policeman of the world, but I am saying, if as people of faith, we believe this is our Heavenly Father's world, we are all His children, we are all His sons and daughters, including the Chinese people who are themselves being oppressed. But if we are all God's children, then what nation in the world has been blessed with the opportunity and the responsibility and the resources to act on behalf of God, to be for the world a protecting force, that we will love the world enough that our greatness is for the purpose of all humankind, the liberation of everybody, right? And then even beyond just 8 billion people, there is another dimension, I think, when we talk about MAGA. Why? Because God needs America to be great again, so that God's providence for this holy land, for this beautiful nation can be fulfilled. And so when we look to the future and how do we move from where we are to where we need to be, the beginning point to me is to understand why we're doing it. And I would like everyone in this room to feel proud in your heart to be American. Don't let anyone, anybody put you down. Whether it's someone from overseas or a neighbor, do not let anyone diminish this nation, please. If it's not already in your deepest soul walking in here tonight, let it be in your deepest soul as you walk out. That the path back, the path forward into the place we have never been yet, begins right here tonight. And it's that encouragement that I'd like to leave with you with this practical recognition. When Cain killed Abel, not only was Abel's life lost, but Cain was cursed. Whenever in human history those forces which represent Cain win, everybody loses. Ultimately, including Cain. Think about it. If Hitler's Nazi Germany had prevailed in the Second World War and taken over all of Europe, had gained Britain's submission, and the United States had remained at home, what would Europe have looked like? And what would it have become? That didn't happen because Abel prevailed. When Abel prevails, everybody wins, including Cain. Think about it. If Abel had been able to prevent his brother from killing him and had been able to embrace him from the position of Abel, Abel's alive and Cain survives and the brothers are reunited. This is God's secret. So right now, we are able. The world that's coming against us, the forces that are coming against us are Cain. They want to destroy us, cancel us, remove us. If they succeed, can you imagine the darkness that will come upon this nation of America? Can you imagine the darkness that will fall upon the world if there is no nation capable of standing up to a Communist Party of China, whose ambitions are global? We must prevail. And in prevailing, we will save ourselves, we will save our family, we will save our nation, we will save the world, and we will save and fulfill the providence of our Heavenly Father. So if there's any way that we can inspire or encourage your support and participation with these wonderful young people, honestly, that's why Thomas and I are here tonight, and I hope these comments will resonate with you. Thank you.
Okay. Incredible. Really, really powerful words. And I'm very envious of very cool accents. I don't know if I'm the only one there on that one. So, like I said, now we're moving to Q&A. So let me start here. with the questions that got sent in. Just need a moment here to load. Boom, 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 boom. All right. We are not immune to technical difficulties here. Sorry, everybody. Well, while that's trying to load up, does anybody have any live questions that we can take for the time being? Any mics that we can pass out? Okay. Got a hand raised over here. Do we have a mic? Okay. Oh.
About now. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, first of all, for being here, for preparing and delivering those comments. And this question is, I think the scope of the problem is probably so large, I don't know if I can actually frame the question narrow enough to answer it in a way that can be understood. But when you think about whether it's, a corporation, or an organization, a company, or organized religion, any of the major religions, whether it's in this country or across the world, it seems that the leaders of those organizations who are not on the side of good, they'll create a feeling or even a mission or a vision of saying that we are one whatever. We are united in whatever their mission is. And at the same time, they'll create these core values that sound good on paper, but what's missing is God, what's missing is Jesus, what's missing is the reference to what we are diametrically opposed to, which is Satan. And if you are one of the people in that organization who don't agree with that, because you're holding fast, to use a Lutheran term, you're the rock in the shifting sand. If you are that, then you are seen as the one who is destroying. You are seen as the one who is disrupting. You are seen as the one who is the problem. So how do we combat that on such a large scale? Could it be that some of the church or religious organizations must fall because they're not the church? And how do Christians who are embedded in those organizations, how do they fight that? Do they have to sink the ship for the right people to survive? And does that question make any sense at all to either one of you?
I think maybe you could phrase it quickly as do Christians and people being faithful need to an extent, deconstruct some of the old monolithic institutions? Is that roughly what you're thinking?
That's exactly what I meant to say.
Great.
Yeah. I think we're all experiencing that, We see, leaders talking about things that we value, but from completely the upside down point of view. Like they're trying to pass a bill in Congress supposedly to protect the voting rights of people, but we know that bill is actually going to destroy the voting system in the country. I think that's exactly one of the frustrations of a Cain-dominated society. I do think that we can only do so much as individuals, but what we do as individuals is very important. And I think you do whatever you can. If an organization is acting in the name of God or in the name of virtue, but is not actually, it will not prevail ultimately. But we need to speed its demise by what we do. So all I can suggest is that we be courageous. The one thing that we cannot afford to do, and I think Victor made that very clear, we cannot afford to acquiesce. We cannot afford to give in to evil. It's like before Churchill, there was Chamberlain, right? He went to Hitler, he tried to make a deal, he came back and said, peace in our time. Sounded good. But he was his decisions and his policy would have ruined Britain. So there's always people like that. There's always leaders like that. There's always movements like that. I think we just have to have the centering and the relationship with God to recognize them and oppose them. I mean, it means sacrifice. Sometimes you cannot stay, right, in an organization, even in a company, which is doing things that you recognize to be wrong. Do you have anything else?
Mark, you ask really good questions. Thomas touched on it right at the end. I think this is the tough side of the situation we're in. Whilst we may not have to strap ourselves into a Spitfire and take off into the night sky to protect our nation at the moment, I think it would be naive to imagine that we can extricate ourselves from the position that we are in without sacrifice. It's a hard thing to say, and it seems like a real downer to acknowledge it, but it is my conviction that if we take our minds and our hearts to God and make the offering of our lives for the highest and best purpose that our Heavenly Father identifies us as capable of fulfilling, then we will find the way to serve. We will find the capacity and discover the capacity within ourselves to make the sacrifices necessary to prevail.
Awesome. I think a related question that's very practical and on a lot of people's mind is should we have a stay and fight posture when it comes to something like my church is going down a path that I don't like, or something like I'm in a blue state that's getting bluer? Should we have a stand and fight posture, I'm going to reverse this, or should it be I'm going to pack up and head to fortify our ranks somewhere else? I think that's a common question that a lot of people are facing now. So very quickly, before we move on to some others, would you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think it's important to try and to stay and fight as much as possible. Sometimes it's beyond your capabilities, but if we don't stop to resist, no change will ever come until the whole organization collapses from its own corruption.
Awesome. Great. So a question here. Given that we are in an area that is still largely conservative, and it can feel like there's not much we can do, or there's not much to do in the political, ideological scene, or at least not without driving several hours to Nashville or Richmond. What are some practical ways to apply what we talked about tonight in areas like these?
I think one practical step would be to recognize that those of us in this room tonight come from various congregations, right? Let me just ask this. Show of hands if you are a member of Pastor Grizzle's congregation. Yeah, God bless you. You guys turned out tonight. That's great. Okay, another show of hands if you've come from another congregation. Yeah, wonderful. Here's one of the first things we can do. We can celebrate exactly what's happening here tonight. Celebrate the fact that we, as faithful Christians who love this nation, are willing and wanting to come together. So that's one practical step and I would suggest, and this is specifically, I know that Turning Point Faith This is in its infancy, folks. It's like 4 months old. There is an opportunity here for you, maybe for your sons and daughters, your relatives, to connect with George and just see what is the possibility of establishing a little base down here. And what would that base look like? It might look a little bit like this gathering tonight, where individuals will come from various congregations, from different churches, but they'll come together and meet for a common purpose, and that is to save this wonderful nation. That's one practical suggestion.
Wonderful. Any comments?
Well, one thing that I really would stress is that we need to understand the enemy. And I don't think that's been done well enough. When Marxism started chewing up the Christian nations of Europe and Asia and then America, there wasn't actually a coherent response. Different people responded from their own point of view. Different people had their own ideas about what was wrong with Marxism. But Marxism is a pretty powerful global force. And if we don't really understand the ideological roots of Marxism and its offshoots, it's very difficult to understand what they're doing. I think all the time we're surprised, right? Commentators say, I don't know why they're doing that. I don't know why they believe that there's more than two genders. I don't know why they teach this critical race theory. There is a reason for all of it, and if you understand the ideology, you can understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to destroy the existing society that you don't want them to destroy. So I think we all need to be educated. I know for me, when the Soviet Union collapsed, I thought, finally the world figured out this system doesn't work. It's corrupt. It creates poverty. It creates death and misery. Why would anybody on earth want to be a Marxist? But now, 3 decades later, we have China is more powerful, richer, has a bigger global presence almost than the Soviet Union. What happened? Our institutions in America that we thought were safe from crazy, radical, destructive ideas are being destroyed. So we never defeated Marxism, and we need to defeat Marxism through understanding, clear understanding, and then clear opposition.
Awesome. So, real quick, any live questions? Do we have a mic down there? Thank you. Thank you very much. Should be a little switch on the bottom that you push up.
In the history of the world, there are only two nations that have been founded worshiping God. The United States is one, the other is the nation of Israel, which has both a divine deed and divine promise. We are the Gentiles. I served my country for 42 years. I read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich and Mein Kampf in high school. Every time I deployed and came back, I could see the degradation. This is spiritual warfare. The forces of evil are trying to prevail because we're turned into Laodicean churches. We have to remember that God is still on the throne. Prayer changes things. This is spiritual warfare. We need to unite in prayer. It's the most important weapon a Christian has. My desire for this country is the 3 R's: repentance, revival, and then the rapture for everything to be fulfilled. My question is this: where's the fire, the zeal, to get back on our knees, to turn to God, to have that repentance? Where are we? What can we do to initiate it? And I know it starts with me.
Thank you.
Amen. No, that's not a trite response. It's actually the response. It does. Where does it begin? We can spend the rest of our life looking around us for someone else to champion the cause. Or we can sit here tonight and say, I will not leave this space without acknowledging that it rests with me. In whatever unique manner that can manifest. Each one of us has something absolutely unique that God can use. I think when we drop to our knees, the question we could well ask, God, who am I to you? Who am I? What did you create me with the potential and the responsibility to be? And listen.
Amen. So maybe, Thomas, you can answer that, or Victor, you can continue. Where do you think it went? Maybe we had this zeal and it faded out. Do you have any thoughts where it may have gone? The zeal, the fire to go forward and be that person.
Well, I think there's several aspects to that answer. It's very easy to criticize other people, right, for their failings. But one of the problems with the left is it's very sly. Satan actually always precedes God. Cain precedes Abel with a pseudo-solution. And frankly, we've been fooled. We've got to so far down the road that it's only the extent of the seriousness of the problem that is alerting us and waking us up at this point. But also, as I mentioned before, we never really countered Marxism historically. We just hoped it would go away. It would collapse on itself, and in many respects it did. The Soviet Union collapsed on itself. But look how important Reagan's role was by standing up, by being absolutely unequivocal in opposing it, in calling it an evil empire. I think it was his resolve, more than anything else, that brought an end to the Soviet Union, which was a totally corrupt system. So we in order to have the zeal, I often think, in the Great Awakening, you've heard about the preaching of people like John Whitefield. Benjamin Franklin was his friend, and once he measured how far the voice of George Whitefield would go. And he figured about 30,000 people could gather outside and hear the sermon. Imagine the spiritual power there. That spiritual power is the foundation for America. But it has to be renewed, like Reagan said, it has to be renewed. We tend to be comfortable, right? It's really up to us, as Victor's saying. We always we want to be comfortable. We don't want to even recognize the fact that many of the foundational elements of our country are being destroyed, because then we have to do something about it. It's really a personal matter. When I started talking, I talked about how each of us throughout our life have to keep seeking for God. It's so true. And that's the role of churches, right? It's to remind us constantly, to help us remember. But it has to be a personal path as well, a personal journey as well. So God is always there. God never goes away. He's never on vacation. So if we're not experiencing God, it's because we've lost the connection. We're going in a different direction. So I hope that tonight has helped maybe frame the issues in a way that help us remain connected to God's providence. It's really what we have to get back. It's a spirit. It's a spirit that guided George Whitefield to inspire 30,000 people, that inspired the founders to establish such a noble and unprecedented system of government. So, again, to be together with all of you for different congregations, but more than that, is there anybody who shares your religion exactly? No. Everybody's faith is unique. It's one of the amazing things about human nature. I lived for many years in the Middle East, 25 years, and I know probably many of you know very little good about Muslims. And I know there's lots of problems with Islam, but I also saw good things. Within everything there's Abel and Cain. Within Islam there's Abel and Cain. Within Christianity there's Abel and Cain. So Abel has to work with Abel. Abel has to seek out Abel. And together they have to overcome Cain. So you have to find out, I have to find out what God wants you to do, what God wants me to do. It's individual.
Great. Any questions up here? See a raised hand here, standing there.
Not sure if you all are familiar with any of the Andy Andrews writings, but he wrote a book called How Do You Kill 11 Million People? And in that book, the powerful thought is, how did Hitler do what he did? And how did he accomplish in such a vast array what he did? And the gist of the book and the idea behind it is basically he just lied. He just lied to the people. He lied to one and they believed it. So then they lied to others. And from there it grew until they were able to get people into train cars and into gas chambers with the lie of, you're going to be reunited with your family and you're going to get to take a shower, and the end result was 11 million people died. What I'm seeing right now in our America is we're being lied to over and over, to where now America has believed the lie for so long. There are so many people on the other side, on Hitler's side, if you will, and people are dying because of it. My question is, as one person, as one individual standing here tonight, as each person as an individual, what should I do? How can I stand up to stop that lie? To stand up and say, no. I know we're going to be ridiculed for it. We're going to be persecuted. That's a given. It's scriptural. But can you give me a key? Can you give me something? What am I, as one American person, expected to do to stop that lie?
The first thing again is to understand really what the lie is, where it comes from. It wasn't only the acquiescence of the Jews in the gas chambers that they went believing that they were being reunited with their families. It was the German people themselves. Satan gains power only to the extent that we give power to Satan. So a lie has power only to the extent that it's believed. The beginning of resisting a lie and rejecting a lie is understanding what that lie is. That's really, I think, the key point. The first lie ever told was when Lucifer told Eve, if you eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall be like God, right? That's the beginning of all evil.
Right. I think I saw a hand in the middle here. Any other questions here? All right, cool. Got one on here. Victor, you alluded to this earlier. How can Christians of different denominations, theological convictions, how can we work together towards the common goal without compromising on our distinctives or
Yeah,
painting them over, so to speak?
That's a very, very good, important question. Let me use this example, and then I'll come back to the question. I know we've exited Afghanistan, but if you could imagine 3, 4, 5 years ago, and you were a soldier in Afghanistan on patrol with half a dozen of your colleagues in arms, and you were ambushed, came under attack. In that moment, did you stop to think or wonder or worry about whether your buddy to the left was an Italian from Brooklyn, New York, Italian Catholic from Brooklyn? The person on your right, an African American from Atlanta? Guy behind you, Hispanic American Catholic from Miami, and so on and so on. You know where I'm going. The truth of the matter is, all you know in that moment is, I have the backs of my friends, and my friends have my back. There is a bigger issue here than some of the things which, when we're back home, we might choose to bicker over or separate ourselves by. So my attitude to this is, the task before us is too great for us not to set aside. And I'll go even further. The task in front of us right now is too great for us not to bring down some of the barriers that we have constructed to separate ourselves one from another, because what we are facing is that serious. And my point is, let us come together for the sake of our nation. Let us come together for the sake of Providence. Let's win this battle, prevail in this war, and then when it's over, we'll come home and figure out see whether our differences, the differences that separated us before we engaged this fight, are still as important now as they were then. But let's win the battle first. Okay? I mean, truly, this is a time for change. We are not going to win this battle by returning to something which once was. Making America great again assumes that if we bring something back which once was, that it will produce a different outcome than that which we once were produced. That which we once were produced this mess that we're in right now. So why, if we were just to bring back that to this moment, should we believe that we'll have any different outcome? The challenge, and someone mentioned, and maybe we'll be wrapping up soon, but one of the challenges that I think we could leave here tonight with is this notion that it's not what we were or bringing back something which we once were, but it's what is it that we must become that we have never been or experienced yet that will be sufficient to win this war. Would you be willing to join that army that wants to say, we wish to seek that which we've never been before, and we're willing to give up some of the things that were very, very precious to us in the past in order to get to that future? this is one of the challenges that I think that we could face, and wonderful souls like you can find others similar and join forces together.
Excellent. So, just a last quick question to wrap up here. In one sentence or phrase, what is the key takeaway from tonight, both of you?
I think the lesson of history is the lesson that God taught to the first man and woman. You must be responsible. You must, if you're not responsible, your life will be destroyed. I think we cannot rest with what we have, with what we've done, even with what we believe. We have to go further until our responsibility is fully consistent with God's will and God's providence.
Victor, one sentence key takeaway.
It's echoing what Thomas has just said. In my understanding, there has never been, ever in history, a moment where God's will was fulfilled or realized without a human being or human beings fulfilling a certain responsibility in making that so. Is that true or not? Has there ever been a time where God magically won a battle on his own? There's never been such a time. So the takeaway that I would like to leave with you tonight is that Providence is a partnership. It's a partnership between the source and origin of that providence and purpose, and we, as the faithful sons and daughters, who in understanding the heart of our parent, our Father in heaven, take up the task to fulfill our portion of responsibility to bring the victory, and for able to prevail. Then we all win.
Excellent. Let's give them both a round of applause. And so, just to conclude the evening, we're going to be hanging out outside. I mentioned, whoop, it's stuck here. Well, that's gone. Thomas Cromwell's book is right outside. He's going to be signing copies. You can get them right there, and we'll be mingling about. So thank you all so much for coming, and have a good night.